Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Robbins, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between. When I got the outreach for this next guest, I thought there could not be someone more aligned with the work that I am doing. And so when I invited Kate Manser on the show, it was the most perfect conversation. I read her book, which is right here, You Might Die Tomorrow, but I didn't even need to read it because it was literally like we were sharing the same head. So many of the ways that she thinks about how to live and how to embrace death as a way to live your life more meaningfully are so many of the things that I talked about. And so we just had the most incredible conversation that really explored what it means to live fully, what it means to be connected, what it means to live on purpose, not necessarily for a purpose, but on purpose, what it means to live with meaning and joy and love and all the incredible things that I think so many of us want in our lives, but might be inhibited to step into. So I know you will all enjoy this episode as much as I enjoyed recording it. And with that, here is my episode with Kate. Welcome, Kate, to Life, Death, and the Space Between.
Thank you so much. It's a beautiful day to be alive here and to be with you, Dr. Amy. We were just talking about how much we have in common, so I'm especially excited to connect with you today.
Yes, this is like a perfectly synchronistic interview because your work is all about using death really as a way to inform how you live your life. So tell us how death has confronted you in the face several times, when it first started and kind of what pushed you into this path.
Well, before I had 3 deaths in the span of 6 months, I was kind of just like everybody else. I didn't really think too much about death. I assumed that I would get to live to be 88 years or whatever the American life expectancy is these days. And then when I had 3 friends die in the span of 6 months, just in unrelated, unexpected events, one by one, it was like the safety of my life was being taken away from me. And I became very hyper acutely aware of death, such that I began to just fear it all the time, to the point that it was taking away the joy of life. I had trouble getting to sleep because I was having visions of my family and friends dying. I was afraid to drive because I was afraid I would hit somebody or I would fly off the edge of the overpass. My hypochondria, which has always been a friend that I lock arms with to a certain degree, got to be just totally untenable. And coincidentally, at that time, I have a friend and a colleague at Google, which is where I used to work, who was living my dream life. He was just so fun and gregarious at that time. And so I was watching him through social media, right? He opened a nonprofit. He started a really cool side hustle. He plays really cool, interesting, hilarious pranks on his friends. And at that time, he was training for his 3rd attempt to summit Mount Everest. And I was just hiding away in my little house while he's out there living this, just vibrant dream life, taking chances, taking risks, having fun. Well, he happened to be up at the climbers base camp when the Nepal earthquake struck in 2015, and he was killed instantly in an avalanche. And that changed everything for me, because I realized that while climbing Everest is probably not on my bucket list, I'm pretty klutzy, and I could probably die climbing the stairs just as easily as I could die climbing Mount Everest. And so it was at that time, right after Dan died, that I realized that we all have a certain amount of time and energy in our lives, and I could put mine into trying not to die, or I could put that into living. And so it wasn't, I don't want to lead you on and say it was an awakening and I've been walking on clouds and rainbows ever since. This is a decision I've had to make over and over again in the mud. And I truly, really do need to recommit to it every single day. But since I invited an awareness of death into my life, everything has changed for me.
So what do you think it was specifically about his death? Because like you said, there were several other deaths, which you talk about in the book, that kind of sent you down this road a little. But the piece about his, was it that he was just already living so fully that it was like he was really exhibiting what it meant to live?
I think it's a lot of things. I think sometimes in life, things are meant to happen at a certain time. That is part of it. I think it was time for me to wake up. I think it was time for me to see things differently. And I also think, just like you said, Dan living so vibrantly, and truly the other 3 friends of mine who died, all 3 of them also lived, I would say, more vibrantly than the average person.
And kind of died in like really tragic
Yeah. So
ways.
One of them, the first one was my boss at Google, 27 years old. He was on a Bible study kayaking canoe trip in Arkansas, and he did like a small cliff dive, and it was just, the water was really high, and he probably died instantly because there might've been a hidden log under there. My second friend was actually my husband at the time. It was his cousin. He was diagnosed with renal cancer, and 6 months later, he transitioned. And then my third friend was a friend of mine from college, Mallory. She was literally walking across the street in Santa Barbara where she lived and got hit by a drunk driver. Well, she was on foot, and, he fled the scene, and eventually they did catch him. But yeah, just really, just really unexpected things. And what happened was, I went from going, oh my God, I could die at any moment, I must put all my energy into trying not to die because dying is horrible and dying is scary, to then something, when Dan died, it went click. Yeah, any of us can die tomorrow. I can die tomorrow. What do I want to do with the time that I have? And I think part of it was the fact that Dan lived so extravagantly, vibrantly, and with joy and fun. And he became that example for me in life and in death. Because it's sort of like we sort of shoot ourselves in the foot. A lot of us are afraid of dying, or there's a lot of people that I come across in my work that say, oh, I'm not afraid of dying. Well, my next question is, are you afraid of dying without really living? And most of us are. But, I'll give the example of those of us who maybe procrastinate on putting together our will and our power of attorney and those kinds of documents. Most of us have a fear of not leaving loose ends for our family. And yet we deny and, oh, we don't have to do that yet. But if we did that, we could then alleviate the fear of not leaving loose ends for our family. Just like if we have a fear of not living fully before we die, guess what? I'm alive today, and that's fully within my control today. And so instead of trying to focus on not dying, I essentially capitalize on my fear of not living and use that as motivation to get the courage, because it's scary, to get the urgency, to bust the procrastination and decision paralysis and fear and all of that, and to live whatever vibrant life feels like me today. And some days that might be hopping on a plane and traveling somewhere really cool. Some days it might mean bringing soup to my friend, even when I'm feeling really tired. Some days that might be just curling up on the couch with my dog in the afternoon. Whatever vibrant life means to you, I believe is deeply personal for everyone.
Yeah, I feel like I'm interviewing myself right now. So how did you begin to kind of take these first steps? Because sometimes we are confined by life, right? Like you can't just quit your job and summit Mount Everest, and it doesn't sound like that's what he did either. But really, where do these moments of reflection on death play in? What do those look like in your everyday life?
It's been a cycle for me, and it's been a journey along the way. And at first I was just so on fire with being alive. Like after Dan died, I did those crazy things. I did quit my job at Google and travel around the world. And I did, I started blogging under, the You Might Die Tomorrow brand name. I did decide that I was going to write a book. Like these are really big things that, we can't be necessarily constantly doing those. And so in the beginning, it was taking those risks and living really big. But now as I've grown into that, it's become more a process of noticing endings. So one of the questions I get a lot is, well, how can I become more comfortable with death? How can I embrace death? And one thing I always recommend is to just look around in your life for the beauty of endings. Right now we're in April, transitioning from winter to spring and spring to summer, right? Like the beautiful changing of the seasons. We have, plants that go dormant. Sometimes they come back, sometimes they don't. We see relationships that we either choose to end or end for other reasons. And these are all endings. And just realizing that death is as natural and beautiful as being born. And one thing that does is that I've noticed is, when someone dies, if we haven't worked with the idea of endings and death and really become comfortable with how natural that is, we have to go through the shock. And maybe to answer your question from earlier, that might be what happened with Dan. When my first 3 friends died, I had to go through so much shock to even think, oh my God, people die, which sounds so dumb.
And young people, right? Which I think is a huge...
Young people. And you have to deal with that shock of that. But now that I've worked for so many years with endings, as I'm sure you have too, I now know that when people around me have died, you still have to go through grief. You still miss the person. You're still wondering, like, why did God and, the universe decide to take this person now? But I don't have to deal with that shock of like grappling with the notion that people die. And I think that's why Dan gave me that gift of being able to see past the shock and into the gold and the gift that is in the ending.
I think what's so interesting here, and what you and I certainly have in common is, and I'm curious about, is what did you do? Like, what did your life look like before? And then what does it look like now? That feels like bringing death in made it so different. What do you think the 2 paths would have been? What would path I'm afraid of death, which is really not living, look like? And what is like, I am not afraid of death and I'm going to live?
It's like before I began to embrace death, I had my hands over my eyes. And I was just blindly following where the breeze of society or my parents or my friends' expectations, I was just being pushed along, I got to make money. I need to get this promotion. I got to get my house a certain way. What kind of car do I want to drive? What achievements do I need to do?
So very external, it sounds
external, like. And not from me. Just what the external, like going in that flow. And now that I have death as an intimate part of my life, and I've done years of work to embrace, and that the hand comes off the eyes, and it's like,
it feels like, oh,
who is Kate? What does Kate think is important? What does Kate want for her life before she dies? And as you were asking the question, like the word just kept coming up for me: love. Love. That's what the hand comes off the eyes, and then my priorities crystallize, and what rises to the top is love.
So daily, how is your life looking? Like if you would have stayed on that path, you would have stayed at Google for a while, maybe, right? Kept maybe climbing up the ladder. Like what did that life look like to you before, when you envisioned it? And then when you got the freedom, I'm so curious what, other than kind of going around and promoting the book, and also I'm curious what the life looks like now.
Well, I'll just preface it by saying that, like, as an example, a sort of a metaphor, I'm really passionate about the idea that there's so many different ways to meditate, right? We always think like, oh, I need to be in this dark room, no noise, no distraction. I need to sit a certain way. I have to have perfect posture, my eyes, my hands, everything, right? And that's great. Do that kind of meditation. But I'm really passionate about the idea that meditation is less about where we are or what the position of our body is, and it's all about the quality of our mind and spirit. So I love to teach walking meditation. That's one of the things that I just love doing. I've been teaching walking meditation for about 5 years. And I use that as a metaphor to answer your question, because someone can be in a corporate job. Someone can be, a plumber. Someone can be working at a nonprofit. Someone can be a rock star. Anything that you are in your job or in your life doesn't preclude you from living, this vibrant, soul aligned life, because it's less about what we're doing and more about the energy that we bring to whatever we do. I love that old story about the documentary film crew who was doing they were filming a documentary in a hospital. And so they, had just filmed this surgery and it was really important. And the surgeons and all the surgery technicians left the room, and in comes the janitor as the documentary people are in there, and they decided to interview him. And they said, tell me about your job. What do you do? And he said, I have the most important job at this hospital. I make sure that everyone stays healthy, that we don't have disease and virus outbreaks. And I take so much meaning from my job. And the documentary film crew was obviously flabbergasted, because here's the janitor, the custodian, who gets so much meaning, deep meaning from their job. And so to answer your question, now my life is interesting. I'm, like I told you earlier, I'm living in this motorhome. I've been traveling around the country for about the past 2 years, meeting people, doing interviews, speaking, writing books, all of that. And that won't last forever. I'm feeling called to, in the next year or so, settle in a stationary place. But I just had this interesting realization the other day where I was like, oh, I'm actually never going to retire, because what I do, right? Speaking, and what we do, Amy, speaking and writing books, like, as long as we got marbles rolling around up in our minds, we can continue doing our work. And even if you do retire from a corporate job, for example, as long as you've got marbles up in your mind, you can still be doing life work. You could still be writing. You can still be doing nonprofit work. You can still be helping others. And so, yeah, less about what we're doing. And I think it's all about just the quality that we do it with.
The intention. It sounds like really the intention behind why you're doing what you're doing. And I think that can bring you clarity too, if you're looking at the intention behind it and suddenly you're like, ooh, that doesn't feel in alignment anymore. And if I were to die tomorrow, I mean, I ask myself the same questions. I use it a lot I think where it's helped me a lot is in my relationships with people. It's like, how do I want people to feel in relation to me? And if I were your friend who stepped off the curb and got hit by that driver, what do I want the people around me's last experience to have been with me? Because relationships is something I really value. And so I think about that. I use it all the time. And I think I use it not even in the ways that, like, of course, with my friends and family, but also just with people like in the grocery store, on the street, just being really intentional about saying hello, looking someone in the eye. I mean, I've started in the elevator even to be like, good morning to people, because everybody just gets in and they're on their phones. And it's a little bit awkward at first, but it's like, we've lost this human connection. And I think we all just want to feel like we matter. And I think if you die without kind of feeling like you matter, then I don't know where I just went with this, but then that feels like, what was it for? What was it for? Feeling like you mattered to someone and they mattered to you.
Oh, And that's everything.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know a Dan in our lives. You are probably a Dan, Amy, for other people, right? Like a Dan is someone who gets in the elevator and says hello and does the thing that maybe feels a little bit awkward, who comes to the party and doesn't ask people what they do for a living and instead asks them what lights you up in life, right? So it's about like pushing ourselves to be that person instead of relying on others, because in that we grow. And what you just described about checking in with yourself and living like you might die tomorrow, I call that the deathbed gut check. So the deathbed gut check is something that I do all the time, just when I'm stuck on a decision and I don't know what to do. And that can be everything from a really big decision in my life, like, do I want to quit drinking, to a small decision like, do I want to go to this family gathering, right? So the deathbed gut check is when you are faced with this decision, you're not quite sure what to do. All you do is maybe you close your eyes for a moment and you imagine yourself on your deathbed and you're looking back on your life.
Let me stop you right there before we even get to that point. What happens if you get to the point where you can't even imagine yourself on your deathbed? And then we could keep going, because I think that's very scary for people.
Wow, I've actually not encountered that before. I have people who imagine their deathbed and they're like in another galaxy. Like some people are like, oh, I'm in another dimension. Some people say that they're in their like childhood bed. Some people say that they're in like, a room with like bright windows. Some people say they're on their beach, on a beach somewhere. But I don't actually have as much many people who say that they're not able to imagine their deathbed at all. And maybe
so
they
their
just
anxiety doesn't get too in the way at that point.
I think so. I think, we all do cognitively know that, at some point we're going to die. And I think many of us hope that we die a certain way, whether that be surrounded by friends and family or in our sleep or something nice and gentle. But yeah, so, and really, like the idea in this deathbed gut check isn't to dwell on that vision of you being on your deathbed. It could just be at the end of your life, like you're 99 years old and you're going to die in 3 days and you're looking back. And so what you do is you look back on the decision that you're trying to make and you imagine what your life is like having chosen option A. You don't quit drinking, for example, or you don't go to the family gathering. And I call it the gut check. You can't see in my video, but I'm pointing literally to my gut. You feel into how you feel looking back on your life, having made that choice in your gut. How does that feel intuitively to you? Do you feel like a heavy pit where you're like, I should quit drinking, or I should go to that family party? Or it could be the opposite. Maybe there's a toxic family member there that you really don't want to see, and it should be the opposite. But it's your intuition, it's your gut. And so in the beginning, when you try the deathbed gut check, it might take a minute, but once you start doing it frequently, I can like check in with my deathbed gut check in like 15 seconds, and it's helped me make so many decisions in my life.
What have you found are sort of the things that people really either through doing their deathbed gut check, or just as you've taken your show on the road, what have you found is some of the things that come up that people are wishing they had done? Finally, after so many years of you supporting the podcast, which I am so grateful for those of you who have supported the podcast on Patreon, thank you. It has truly been what has allowed me to keep going with this. And you've heard me say this over and over again. But I finally have an online community. So if you are currently a supporter of the podcast through Patreon, you should have received an email. If you are not yet a supporter of the podcast and want to join the Space Between community, now is your chance. Make sure you get on Patreon at Patreon at Dr. You can just put in Dr. Amy Robbins and it will come up. And if you will become a supporter, you will get added to my community. Also, if you don't want to be a supporter, you can join my newsletter, which is a great way to get more information about the things I'm working on, upcoming events. The community just gives you a way more insider track, access to me, access to conversations, questions, quarterly Q&As for my highest subscribers. So come on over and join us in the Space Between community.
That there are certain things that people want to have done, but the underpinning current beneath all of these sort of external things that people want to do is they want to live true to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And they want to self-express.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's a weight on all of our shoulders, and this is natural. Everyone does this. I do this. We all wear masks. We all, have certain levels that we're willing to open up to. And part of that is for safety.
Mm-hmm.
But when we pile the masks on and it gets deeper and thicker and heavier, we get to the point where we have this undercurrent of fear that we're going to die, not only without showing our true selves to the world, but without ever truly knowing ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times when
So
people ask
true.
me, what is a purpose? Because I think you can make up your purpose. I don't necessarily think that we have like one.
I have a whole theory on why purpose I think is nonsense, but
so we're on the same page.
Yeah, it fits a little bit. You look at through it blah blah blah. You look at it through the lens of meaning, and how I talk about it is the expression of your essence, like your soul, the qualities that your soul is here to express. And so when we are living from the place of the qualities our soul is here to express, joy, compassion, love, giving, connection, whatever that is, then what you are here to do, and I think where you were going was there's not one thing, then you're really living out your true self in that way.
Wow. And you say that so beautifully. So say that again. We're here to express the qualities our soul needs to express. Is that what you said?
Yeah. The essence of our soul, which are the quality. Yeah.
Well, and that's exactly it. That's self-expression or soul expression. Either way you want to look, they're sort of one and the same to a degree. But it's about that level of expression. And so I think what people get wrong about expression is we tend to think it's just about creation. Oh, I need to create this. I need to show myself. I need to, expose myself and be vulnerable. And that's great. Like, absolutely, self-expression is about creation. But don't overlook the fact that self-expression is also about destruction. It's about taking away and facing our self-doubt, our imposter syndrome, the lies that we tell ourselves and others. And, it's Michelangelo said when someone asked him about how did you create the David? How did you, make this incredible sculpture out of marble? And Michelangelo said, well, it's just my job to take that chisel when I get that big block of marble and to chip away all of the parts of that marble that aren't David until the David is revealed. And that's what we have to do. Yeah, create, make art, make children, mold them, wear wonderful, funny clothes that express your personality. But we also have to do the work, that shadow work, to face our that self-doubt, the lies, the masks, the shadows, because in that soul's expression that you talk about becomes fully revealed.
And I love you talk about two things too. You talk about being your true self, but the courage to express feelings, which of course is a big one, but also to the friendship, to be in touch with friends, to connect with friends, how important that is, and to allow oneself to be happier. So let's talk about each of those, because I think the friendship is an interesting one. And I don't know, maybe as I've moved into middle age, right. This,
Me too.
but also like
here we are, and we're fabulous.
I'm good with dying, but like not ready to die. So there's that. But there's this sort of reflection point I find of like, I really do like those connections from early on, those connections from childhood where people kind of know you before. Like they almost know that truest self. And you sometimes, again, depending on how you were raised and brought up, and there's a lot of factors playing in, but kind of looking back at different times in your life where those connections were like front and center, and that we lose those over time. And it sounds like that's a regret for a lot of people, is how important those friendships really are.
I think it's really like, what are you collecting? What are you collecting in your life? Or what are you focused on collecting? Are you focused on collecting accolades, achievements, money, objects? Because at the end of the day, when we are at the end of our lives, unless there's some sort of meaning attached to those that really speaks to our soul, then if we're not spending our time collecting and nourishing relationships, we'll very likely feel empty at the end of our lives. There's that amazing quote by Max Lucado, which is, at the end of your life, will you hug that degree in its walnut frame? Will you ask to be carried out to your garage so that you can sit in the leather seats of your beautiful automobile? No, of course not. Because what matters in life is what matters at the end of the life. Relationships. And if that's what matters, then why shouldn't we make it matter now? And so it's just like, it's not wrong to want to go after the promotion or collect, wealth for you and your family. But also, if we're not collecting and nourishing those relationships, we might be setting ourselves up for, once we get past middle age and those accolades and things start to have less meaning, we might be coming into a period of emptiness in our lives if we don't have friends and relationships around to nourish our soul.
Well, and I think too, what you're talking about is how are you using, like, if you are acquiring, right? Like, even as you were saying that, I'm like, well, okay, I have a degree, right? I have a doctorate degree, but what it has been used for is a vehicle for deeper connection, both to myself because of the work that I've been able to do and understand personally, to deepen my own awareness of myself, to make me a better therapist, which then brings me such joy in being able to really connect and move others to their place of joy and hopefully of a meaningful, connected, loving life, right? Like, I think about money too. I'll never forget, a couple years ago, I was working with my coach at the time, and we were talking. I had really wanted a cottage. I live in Chicago. There's not a lot of nature here. And we were really clear on the intention behind that. So I wanted it in Michigan, and I was very clear that the reason that I wanted it was because it would allow me to spend more time with my family, away from kind of the craziness of life, more time in nature, more time connected to the people that I loved. I had like visions of people coming and friends coming and sitting around and talking and playing cards and really being connected. So it had nothing to do with the actual physical manifestation of what that was. I mean, it was that because that was the vehicle by which these other experiences could happen. And we spent like weeks getting really clear on what it was about for me. And as soon as I got clear on it, within a week's time, boom, like it showed up. It is so perfect. And it has become everything that I had always dreamed it would be. It's my parents say to me all the time, like, your family they have such a sense of togetherness. And they say, and I think a lot of it is because you spend this time together kind of away from everything else. And my kids recognize that inner peace too. They'll say, like, can we go up to Michigan and just like detach? Like, I just need to go and have that peace. And so it's not about, can we go to this other home, which I recognize is like a beautiful luxury and a privilege. It's about the experience of being in that space and what that does for certainly my soul. And I think had I come to it from that different place of like collecting, it feels so different.
Well, and who knows if you would have manifested it. Well, first, I just want to say I'm so happy for you and what you've created. And you're obviously a very powerful manifester. And I think
I had a lot of help. She was very powerful. My
your coach?
guide, my coach, she died. So yeah, it was awful, but she was.
What a parting gift.
Yeah, she was like otherworldly for sure.
But I think the fact that you were so clear on the why of it, I think that that helps to really fast track that manifestation. And that's hard work. It's hard work for us to be constantly checking in like, oh, why do I want this? Or what's the deeper meaning? Or the hard question that I had to grapple with a couple of years ago was, where does my self-worth come from? And I had to spend a really dark night of the soul year sorting out that my self-worth was not coming from authentic places, and I had to rejigger the whole thing. But that's what mortality awareness can do, is that mortality awareness can give us the motivation to pull the wool from off of our eyes and to look at those deeper meanings. And then when we're given those truths, the courage to step forward in those.
And I think too, being honest, it's even hard for me as we're talking to say what I just said, because I think a lot of people, like, I'm even having visions of like people listening to this and being like, well, lucky you, like all of that kind of, all of that, like more human stuff that plays out around judgment around things, and what you're talking about, like collecting and all of these things that can be viewed as more negative, I guess. But really it is about really tuning into different ways you can expand this notion of like, what is the life that you want to live, and using death as the way to be honest with yourself about that. Because I think there are ways to create the things that we want in all kinds of different ways.
Absolutely. And what I realized was that, first I was, after Dan died, I was so focused on mortality as this powerful key, and how, thinking about death lit me up to live. It gave me urgency. It gave me courage. It gave me presence. It crystallized and made clear my great priorities in life. But as the years went on, I've realized that while I don't know that I could be doing anything that I'm doing without this awareness of death and without doing that. But now I realize I'm really passionate about being alive. And death is one way to help me feel more alive. And there's so many ways to feel more alive in life. Going outside of our comfort zone, being in community, doing creative work, self-expression. These are all ways to feel alive. Embracing death is just one way under the category of feeling alive. And under that category is also, again, like working with shadow. So one thing I realized a few years ago was, I had already been talking about living like you might die tomorrow for several years, but I had gone through a challenging period in my life, and I wanted out. It was dark. It was shadowy. I was uncomfortable. I didn't like what I was going through. And but I spent all my time before that saying, I love life. I love being alive. But after that, I realized, Kate, if you can't learn to embrace the challenges of life, the obstacles, the dark nights of the soul on the floor, then you can't really say you love life and you love being alive, because those are an integral part of life and being alive. And so since then, I've been on this journey of learning to, and it's a process, I'm still figuring it out, but learning to love my pain, learning to appreciate challenge, learning to not expect challenge and like everything's going to go wrong, but just knowing nothing lasts. The good doesn't last. The bad doesn't last. And just really staying present with that. And so sometimes when I'm crying or when I'm angry, I'll literally go for a walk, and I will walk down the road for, a couple 100 feet just with my arm. You can't see in the camera, but my arms are fully outstretched, both arms fully outstretched. And it's just saying like, God, just let me be a sieve. Don't let me hold on to this pain. I know it has to come. I know it's part of life, and let me embrace it such that we can move on and learn what I need to learn in this trial of my life. And so if you want to say that you love life, we have to learn how to appreciate the full spectrum of being alive.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think exactly what you're talking about here is spiritual bypassing. Is like people who are saying they're willing to embrace life when life is great, but when life is tough, don't want to face it or want to pretend like, oh, well, there, everything happens for a reason and like, it's okay. But not really digging into what it is here that you're here to do to grow. And that can be really hard, and that can be really dark and painful and beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, you speak about how the internet is a wild place, but you speak about how you have this sense of like, oh, you don't want people to come for you because you have this soul cottage in Michigan, right? That's so beautiful. And it is a symbol of abundance. But, people who do say, oh, look at this person, they have this extra house, that's a scarcity mindset. And when we can step into accepting death, accepting life, joy, pain, like to me, that has been a key to cultivating an abundant mindset.
Yeah.
And so people who are saying, oh, Dr. Amy has this thing and it's, superfluous. That's scarcity mindset. That's small-minded thinking. When we're in this abundant mindset and we're open to all of the beauty of life, we know that there's plenty to go around for everyone.
Right.
And that cultivating that mindset is absolute, it's a key not only to abundance, but it's way more fun to have an abundant mindset than a scarce one. And trust me, I know, because I have spent a lot of time in scarcity mindset in my life. But imagine having not that much money. Like several years ago, I went through a financial crisis and I had like not very much money. And I was like thinking that I was going to be on the street at any moment. But in that, there was a time that I was like, you know what, I'm going to try on abundant mindset. Instead of feeling so poor all the time and like I'm on the edge of being homeless, I'm just going to just know that God's going to take care of me. Eventually things are going to work out. I just need to keep my head up and take the next right step. Well, my financial crisis didn't really clear up for like at least another year after that. But telling myself that things were going to be okay and living in that abundant mindset was a much better mental space to be in than feeling like I was on the edge of being homeless every given day. And eventually, things did course correct, things worked out. And so, yeah, it takes a lot of work to cultivate that abundant mindset. And it's almost like we have to stay delusional. Like, to be a little bit delusional when all of the evidence around us says that things are going to go a certain way, but I keep my head on that things are going to work out. It sometimes feels a little bit delusional, but you know what? Stay delulu, my friends.
Yeah. And I think you're really talking about trust here, and not blind trust. I'm sure that you weren't just sitting there like praying for this to happen, but you were really staying in that mindset and working towards
Hustling.
making things happen for yourself, making those shifts, making the changes, because you have an awareness where you're looking at, okay, what is the next right step for me to move towards what it is that I want, so I don't die without having lived.
Oh, well, for the first year I was totally in scarcity mindset, and I was like paralyzed. I couldn't do anything to help myself. I was just waiting for someone to come sweep me away and save me. And that was not fun. And then that second year when I changed my mindset, it was then, okay, let's start hustling. Let's start taking the next right step. Let's start doing something to move the energy. And then that was when things started to shift for me.
It's amazing. I could talk to you all day. If there are any parting words you have for people about You Might Die Tomorrow, it's your book. You might die tomorrow, so live for today. And it came with the cutest little tote bag that I love as well, that I will be bringing with me to the beach this summer as a reminder to savor the moment. What are sort of 3 big takeaways in terms of what we can incorporate into our everyday life?
Well, first, this notion of living like you might die tomorrow. Like I said earlier, when I went through that year of deep death anxiety before Dan died, and I felt like I was going to die at any moment, the idea that I might die tomorrow was the scariest thing I could possibly think of. And then after Dan died and things shifted within me, the idea that I might die tomorrow became the most freeing, motivating, presence and clarity inducing perspective. And so there can be a lot of resistance. I mean, obviously, if you're listening to Dr. Amy's podcast, you have a relationship with death already, but begin to notice the beauty of beginnings, endings, and middles in our lives, in nature, in our relationships, in our homes, in ourselves, right? When we go through different phases and they end and new things begin. But I can't think of a better way to lean into the beauty of being alive than to lean into the full spectrum of the beauty of being alive, from birth to death and everything in between. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to do that process of creation and destruction, right? So just start thinking about, what lies do you tell yourself? What masks do you keep up? Where are you experiencing imposter syndrome? And it's not going to be like a light switch on and off, but to begin to become aware of these areas where we need to destroy some things for our true self to come out. That can create this wealth of creativity and self-expression. The top regret of the dying is, I wish I had lived a life true to myself and not the life others expected of me. And if that's what the people on their deathbed are saying, then we can take that as a lesson that it's important for us to do the work to figure out who the heck we are. And it's going to be a lot of pushing outside of our comfort zone, trying out different things, messing up. But isn't that such a beautiful and fruitful and interesting life?
And being okay with evolving, I think.
Evolution.
Always evolving.
Absolutely. And then the third and final thing is to enjoy your life. If you're wondering, just, like Dr. Amy, you said so beautifully, this element of soul's expression. I believe that our soul's expression can be found in following our bliss. And that isn't hedonistic, because if you are sort of, closed off or living a false life, then you might go after these hedonistic elements, sex, drugs, rock and roll, eating 1,000 brownies if you might die tomorrow. But if you are in touch with your mortality, you probably have a clear perspective on what's important to you: love, community, kindness, peace. Be a hedon in those areas, and follow that bliss. Like I said, cultivate enjoyment every day. I call them alive moments. And it's those moments when you suddenly have this awareness where, like, maybe you're outside and the breeze touches your cheek in a particular way and you feel the sunshine and you just realize, oh my God, like, I'm here in this existence and it's so stunning and so beautiful. Or you notice your dog sitting in that perfect sunbeam on the ground and you just feel so grateful for this silly, stupid, wonderful little moment. So cultivate those alive moments, and if all else fails, enjoy your life, and you'll have done well for yourself, as well as, like, the ripples that you're creating, Dr. Amy, as you said so beautifully. You got this degree and you're using this degree to help people. You're creating profound ripples that will go on far beyond that which you can ever imagine. And you're doing that because you love it. I can tell you love it.
I do. I love it so much.
Your pores.
This podcast is like, when people ask me, like, where's your top loves right now? I mean, I love my clinical work. So if my patients are listening, I love you. But I love this podcast. And someone just asked me today, what do you love about it so much? And I'm like, I get to have these amazing conversations with amazing people. It's just such a gift to be able to just talk to people about things that are frankly interesting to me, right? Like, I get to create it how I want to create it. I get to invite on who I want to invite on to have the conversations I want to have, to hopefully bring those ripples out to other people.
We'll take that hopefully out, because you're already doing it. You've already touched me today, and I know so many other people along the journey. And because you enjoy it, that's why Dan was so inspiring to me, is because he enjoyed his life. Had he worked at Google and opened the nonprofit and all that, but was a grouch, I wouldn't have been inspired by him. Right. It's because he seemed to love what he did all along the way. And that's what you do. And that's how we lead memorable lives.
Yep, absolutely. Kate, where can people find your work, get your cute book. And do all cute books come with a tote bag?
For your listeners, yes.
Okay.
If you order a book on my website and you put Dr. Amy in the little box at the bottom, you will 100% get a tote bag. But yeah, my name is Kate Manser, and online I am at The Alive Kate, and my website is katemanser.com. And I would love to connect with you. I love hearing stories about how I love hearing about people's alive moments and all of the unique iterations of those. I love hearing about how mortality has helped you come alive, and let's connect.
Thank you so much, Kate. Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Wondering what comes next and what it all means? Head over to Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or anywhere you get your podcasts and hit subscribe. Also, if you could take a minute to rate and review my podcast, I would really appreciate it. Stay tuned as we continue to explore life, death, and the space between.